Hi, this is Lenny Cameron. This is a special episode that I think I get the most excited about this episode each season because we get to introduce you to the most exciting, fabulous, interesting debut authors. And we have six here today. Each is going to tell us about their new novels. And let's start with the first three with Ashley in the lead. Go ahead, Ashley.
Hi, Lainey. Thanks. I'm here with Tracey, Tara, and Neely. And congratulations, everyone, on your debut novels.
Thanks.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Tracey, let's start with you. Tell us about your debut novel.
Yes. It is set in 1952 in the small Western Kentucky town of Paducah, which is where I live. And it's about a woman named Mrs. Minerva Place, who's a very quirky widow and likes to keep people at arm's length. She has a hobby that she likes to keep a secret also. She goes to the cemetery and she finds names that interests her, and then she researches them at the library and goes home and writes their stories. And this is the part she likes to keep quiet. These people come to life in her house, and she has conversations with them and talks to them like they're real people. So they become her friend set, and she keeps everybody who's in the real world at arm's length. But a little 6-year-old boy moves into her neighborhood, and he and his father decide they want to be her friend for whatever reason. They just like her, and they continue with charming perseverance to make their way into her life. And just when she's starting to let down her resistance to them, a terrible accident occurs. And now she's faced with a lot more than just losing her sanity. She has to find out through the living and the dead that it is worth it to forgive. And it's also worth it to let people into your life, even when it hurts.
And tell us the title.
Toward the Corner of Mercy and Peace.
Thank you. Tara, what about you? Can you tell us a little bit about your debut novel?
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. My debut novel, One Summer in Savannah, tells the story of Sarah Lancaster, who's living a quiet life in coastal Maine with her 8-year-old genius daughter, Alana, who came into this world following a terrifying sexual assault. Until one day, Sarah receives a phone call that her father's ill and that she must return home to Savannah to face the ghost of her past. While she's at home and taking care of her father's bookstore and taking care of him, she is very desperate to protect Alana from the Weilers, the powerful family of the man who assaulted her, but have no idea that Alana exists. Sarah thinks she can succeed until she accidentally runs into the identical twin brother, Jacob Weiler, of the man who attacked her. And as you can imagine, that interaction. And so Jacob had just recently returned home to try to put his family back together and understand the violent act that devastated his family and Sarah's family. Sarah doesn't know she can trust Jacob, but she decides to give it a go. And in exchange for his silence, she allows him to spend time with Alana. And as they all begin to spend more and more time together, Jacob and Sarah are drawn together in unexpected ways. I like to say that One Summer in Savannah is a story of love and redemption as Sarah and Jacob truly discover what it means to forgive.
Gosh, I'm already intrigued by how different all of these novels are. Neely, how about you? Will you tell us about your debut novel?
Sure. Yes. Thank you for having me. And mine's also very different from what we've heard about so far. So Love Buzz is the story of Serena Khan, who is at a Mardi Gras bachelorette party for her estranged cousin. And on the last night of the trip, she meets a guy named Julian, and they have this sort of instant serendipitous type of connection. And their interaction is cut short rather abruptly. And so they don't exchange contact information and don't have a way to be in touch after that. And so she decides after she gets home back to Seattle that she's going to find the guy from Bourbon Street. And so she sort of upends her life in the quest to find this guy, to identify whether it was truly this sort of fated interaction or if it was, just sort of a fluke. And so it is a romance at heart, but is very much a journey of living your life for yourself versus for others, and kind of really taking the steps towards living kind of your most authentic self versus living your life for other people. So it's a fun women's fiction. I hate that genre title, but it's a women's fiction with strong romantic comedy types of elements.
One of my favorite questions to ask authors is about the inspiration behind the novels, that original spark of an idea that eventually became the novels that we're talking about today. So Neely, I'll start with you since we just finished hearing about your book. What was your inspiration behind this novel?
Sure. So I like to say that this book is an homage to one of my favorite movies, Serendipity, with Kate Beckinsale and John Cusack. It's a fun rom-com, I think from the 90s, maybe from the early 2000s. I'm not quite sure. But I've always sort of been interested in this, especially as a romance reader myself, of this idea of love at first sight and if it actually exists, and what that looks like if you have built a life that isn't necessarily prepared for that or ready for that if it were to come to you. So to me, it was sort of, you always hear the saying of write the book that you want to read. And this is very much the type of book that I enjoy reading. And yeah, I think that inspiration mostly is from this idea of whether love at first sight really exists.
I loved that movie as well. Tara, what about you? What was that original spark that inspired your novel?
I actually have two sparks. The first one, One Summer in Savannah, is inspired by the South Carolina church shooting. When days after that tragic event, the survivors and the victims' family members walked into a courthouse and they forgave the shooter. And in that moment, I realized I don't know anything about forgiveness because I assumed that forgiveness, that there were acts and crimes and behaviors that were unforgivable. And they taught me the opposite. And so I knew right then that I wanted to write a book that challenged the readers on the definition of forgiveness and for them to try to define forgiveness for themselves. And the second inspiration stems from the millions of Sarahs in the world. While One Summer in Savannah is a work of fiction, portions of Sarah's story is not. There is a person in this world that lives Sarah's story every day and who practices the act of forgiveness throughout her life. And so this novel is inspired by the millions of Sarahs in the world and to try to raise the awareness of the Sarahs in the world.
I got goosebumps at the idea of the shooting and walking in and forgiving. You're right. I agree. I know nothing about forgiveness. That's a whole nother level of forgiveness. Yeah.
Right.
That's a beautiful subject to explore in a book. And Tracey, what was the inspiration behind your novel?
Well, first, I've just got to say, I can't wait to read your books. They sound great. They sound like great books and just up my alley. My inspiration started in a strange way. I was asked by our city to write a series of monologues for a tour that they were going to take through our historic cemetery, Oak Grove. And so I was asked to research these people, sort of like my main character, and then bring their stories to life. The people would stand by their tombstone and be dressed in period clothing and recite what I'd written. So I had a whole collection. We did these for years and years. And I had about 30 people that I had researched. And one day I was cleaning out my files and I thought, there's got to be something more I can do with this because they aren't having the tours anymore down in the cemetery. So I decided I would try to compile them in the style like Spoon River Anthology. But my expectations of my writing skills were a little high and I wasn't able to pull that off. So then I thought, okay, I'll bring in a narrator. And I invented this woman named Minerva who was going to tell the stories of all these people. And that was what was going to weave it together. But that was beyond my ability too. And also Minerva just took over. She just was a character that I could not shut down. And it became her story. And the people who are in the cemetery now illustrate different traits about Minerva and tell and expose her past and why she is the way she is.
As debut novelists, I'm really excited to hear the best writing advice that you received to get you to this point. Because I know there's a lot of authors out there who are not yet published, or maybe they have published a couple of books and just need to be reminded of what it's like to be a debut novelist. So what is the best writing advice you received? Tara, can we start with you?
Absolutely. To start to develop your own process. When I first started writing, I read all the books and blogs and websites, and I took all this advice, and those books and stuff was filled with rules that I call the never ever rules. And one of the never ever rules was never ever edit as you go along. And so I tried to apply that. I thought, okay, they said just get the book down, just write, and you can go back and you can edit later. And I knew of writers that would put placeholders, like insert joke here or insert character description here. And when I tried to do that, I found that my mind would not allow me to move on until I inserted that joke or inserted that character description. And I was miserable when I was writing because it just was not a very fun process for me. And so I was talking to another writer about it, and they just said, you know what, develop your own process. Read those books, get in inspiration from them, but then see what works for you and see what doesn't work for you. And then take all that together and develop your process and what works for you. And so I like to tell writers, develop your own process and don't pay attention to the never ever rules.
I am so happy to hear you say that because I'm the same. I edit as I go. I feel like I break all the never ever rules.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
I don't know, have that permission to develop your own process, whatever works for you.
Right.
Tracey, what is the best advice you received?
Well, I've received so much good advice, but probably the best that rings true for me every day is just to persevere. Mm-hmm. And I've kind of come up with 3 ways that you can strengthen that perseverance muscle. And one of them is to not regard what you see as setbacks, but just as another part of the journey. We're going to get rejection. We're going to get negative comments. But if you can just take those and use what you can and then move forward with them, you're going to be able to persevere. And then another part of perseverance, I think, is to remember the reasons why you're writing in the first place. And if you don't have a real purpose in your writing, I think it's harder to persevere. If it's not to either bring yourself joy or to bring others encouragement and joy, then you need to come up with a reason why you're even doing it. It's too hard not to have a purpose. And then the third part is sort of like what Tara was saying. Enjoy it. Enjoy the process. Find out what works for you and then lean into that. And you'll have strengths and weaknesses just like everybody else, but lean into those things that you love. And that's going to help you persevere too.
I love that you actually said enjoy the process. That's my own mantra because I get so set on that end goal of publishing a book that I stop enjoying the process of writing it. And I'm like, why am I doing this if I'm not enjoying 90% of the 99% of this writing journey? So I love that you said that exact phrase. That is my mantra too. Neely, how about you? What is the best writing advice?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing that's always stuck with me, especially earlier on in the process, was that nothing goes to waste. Meaning, the book that goes in the drawer, which I know a lot of authors, myself included, have books that have never seen the light of day. And at times, especially in the beginning, before, you get your agent or your first book deal, it can feel like wasted time. And that can cause you to question sort of whether you're built for this. The reality is every word you write, every minute you take to put towards the craft, you're learning, you're growing, you're figuring out what your writing process and style is, and it all is beneficial in the long run. And so I would urge people to never look at the words that don't see the light of day or don't get into published material as wasted. And I personally even have gone so far as I've stripped that first book for parts and have taken lines that I loved and, sections and applied them in not only Love Buzz, but in my upcoming book as well, that's coming out after that. So, it's never wasted. And any time that you're applying to the craft is time worth spending, regardless of what the outcome is of that time.
Of course, I think we all have written books that have not yet seen the light of day or may never see the light of day. And that is sometimes the hardest thing to get past, especially as a new writer, is having that done and knowing that it may just need to be set aside and used as practice or whatever. Thank you guys so much.
Thank you for having us. It's exciting to be part of a group of other debuting women, and I'm excited to check out everyone's books.
Do we know when your books are coming out? What are the dates?
Mine is July 4th.
Love Buzz is coming out May 2nd.
Okay, mine's coming out June 30th.
Excellent. Well, thank you all for joining me. Welcome back, Lainey.
Thanks, Ashley. And let me introduce, this is Lainey talking again, our next 3 debut authors. Also super exciting. You won't want to miss these novels. I am here with Donna Norman-Carbone, Annie Cathryn, and Dee Liebhart. And we're going to talk about each of their books that are also coming in the first half of this year. So let me start with Annie. Annie, your book, The Friendship Breakup, mom-com, super funny. I had a chance to read it. Tell those who haven't had the opportunity yet a little bit more about your debut novel.
Sure, I can do that. And I just want to thank you so much, Lainey, for having me. I'm so excited to be here today. My book is considered, it was described as Bad Moms Meets Mean Girls. And someone I know described it as an escapist romp. I wonder who that could be. She may or may not be on this podcast. It follows Fallon Monroe. She's the main character, and she's a mother and married, and she has one daughter, and she's about to turn 40. And she's looking over her life thinking, what am I doing with my life? She's having sort of a midlife crisis. So she decides she loves chocolate. So she wants to have a side chocolate business. So she goes ahead and starts one. And then her neighborhood mom friends start ghosting her. And she has no idea why. And it's a painful experience for her. So instead of waiting to be invited to the next event, which doesn't seem like it's going to happen, she throws her own party to win them back. Well, it's a disaster and she makes everything worse. But in the meantime, she finds this letter. It's a shocking letter that she had discovered 20 years prior, and she thought she lost it. And now she finds it again. And she realizes that this letter is very important. And what's in the letter she has to deal with now in order to move forward. So that's the crux of it.
And one of the fun things about your book is that I love books that they make you laugh, but also there's a serious theme underneath. This idea of being, ghosted by your friends and not understanding what happened. I could relate to just that emotion of what happens there.
Yes.
Let's talk next with Dee Liebhart, because talk about a book that's kind of about how far you'll go for love and people you care about. This one sounds fascinating. I've had a chance to read Annie's, but not the other 2 yet, just because of the timing of when we did this episode, but I'm excited to read it. So why don't you tell us a little bit more about the deep themes and some of the things that this book approaches?
So the book is about an ICU nurse whose mother asks her to euthanize her father, who has dementia. So when you said serious topics, I was like, it doesn't get too much more serious than that. So really what it's about, it's really exploring that idea that we sometimes think we know what we would do in complex situations, and how there's a bunch of different answers. There's the gray area, and that's kind of really where I live when I write, is the gray area. Where do you think you would do something? What do you think you would do? And then how would you do it?
I love it. I'm really looking forward to this one. And let's ask Donna next, because talk about the gray area and the in-between zone. As I understand it, your novel actually breaches into the afterworld, which fascinates me. Tell me a little bit more about this one.
Sure, I would love to. So my book is about 5 women who forged a bond when they pledged a high school sorority. And just before they go off to college, they make a sacred promise to be forever friends. But in college, they start keeping secrets from one another and telling each other lies. And so they do remain friends through their adult years, but they're distant because of geography and family and their careers. Until one day, the main character, Lynn, who is also my narrator, dies in a tragic car accident. And she ascends to a majestic heaven where she's filled with peace. And she's yanked back to somewhere in between, which is what Lainey was talking about, when her husband calls out to her. And so from the in between, she watches her family and friends falling apart. She can feel their emotions, she can hear their thoughts, and she realizes she left too many loose ends behind. So, through her clever influences from the afterlife, she calls her 4 friends to a familiar beachside cottage to remind them of her promise, of their promise, and in hopes that they heal their friendship so her friends could help her family heal. But what Lynn hadn't realized is that if they do, she has to find a way to let them go. And so my book is told on a nonlinear timeline, and it is filled with memories and lots of 1980s nostalgia.
Love it. And when we get to asking you about writing advice, I'm actually fascinated by the decision to do the nonlinear timeline. But,
Okay.
So my next question is all around the inspiration behind the books. And I'm going to mix up the order a little bit. I'm going to ask Dee Liebhart, who's the author of House on Fire, which is that book that deals with the topic of euthanasia and being asked to carry it out. How did that become what you wanted to focus on? And I love this topic with debut novels because often debut novels, like they're the ones that kind of live inside our hearts. And that's why we write the topic. So tell me a little bit more. Why this topic?
So, I mean, yeah, very, very much lives in my heart. My father lived with dementia for 10 years. And so it certainly, a lot of the stuff in the book are things that actually happened to my family, things, situations. And I sometimes when I look at the book, I think the situations that actually happened are the ones that people would not believe happened. And the ones that I made up are the ones that people will go, oh, that's real. So it's very much, reality and fiction are, two very different things. One of the things that would happen pretty regularly with my mom, who was my dad's caregiver, is very often my mom was a very happy, bright, always look on the positive, side of things. And very, very occasionally in that 10 years, my mom would kind of let down her guard and say something like the 2 things that she said repeatedly were, he didn't deserve this. And if he knew this was going to happen to him, he would have gone out in the backyard and blown his brains out. And it was something that got said over and over again. And again, at one point, it came into my head, well, how would that actually happen? How would you actually do that? What would a family experience if they were really going through that kind of a thing? And then I don't remember when, but the first line really came to me. And the first line of the book is, my mother asked me to kill my father on Christmas. And so then once that was there and I knew how the book was going to end, I kind of went with it. And when you do something like this, when you write something that's so close to home, there's this going back and forth between the fiction and the reality, and the fiction and the reality, to the degree that there's a couple things in the book where I have to ask my brother, I was like, but did that happen? Because I've written it so many times and I've been through it so many times. It feels like it happened, but I'm not sure that it actually did. So very much about, my family story, but also not my family story. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. It does. And I'm sure readers are going to have a really emotional reaction to this book as well. Like you can't write about a topic like that without readers really kind of connecting with it if they've been through that kind of experience, or they're thinking it could be something they have to address in the future. So I love when a book is so helpful to readers like that.
Well, I think one of the things that I've had with readers too, which I've been really fascinated with, is people who are experiencing it say it's the only book they've been able to actually read that has dementia in it for some reason, that they actually get through it. Because I think, and I've definitely had a couple of people who had to put it down and said it was too close to home right at this moment. But a lot of people feel like they for some reason, it's more human. I don't know quite what it is,
Interesting. I'm going to go to Donna here, because talk about a book that I think people are going to relate a little to, this topic of grief and letting go of your friends. And I think it's very interesting that your book and Annie Cathryn's book also both deal with friendship, right? From different angles and in different ways. And so how did the inspiration for this one come around?
Years ago, a friend of mine asked me to go to a medium with her because her mother had recently passed and she was hoping to be read. But instead, I was read. And the message was that I needed to reconnect with my childhood friends, my group of friends. And a year later, a close friend of mine passed away in a car accident. So that became very real. And shortly thereafter, my friend's sister reached out to me and asked me to write something for her two daughters that she left behind, to kind of put a book of memories together. And so that, those two experiences kind of ruminated. And I think I really started writing out of a place of grief, to just understand and make sense of everything that happened. And then, I turned it into this fiction. And like Dee, sometimes the fiction and the reality gets blurred for me as well. But the story is fiction, the characters are fiction, but I do have like some Easter eggs and some odes to various friendships in there.
Love it. And the title of that one is All That Is Sacred, in case folks are listening along, trying to map the books to the authors. All That Is Sacred is Donna's book. And let's go to Annie. And Annie, Cathryn, I'm fascinated also, so you took the same topic of friendship and treated it, like you said, I'm the one who said it was a fun romp, this book. It had me laughing so hard. I was actually sick, and I was reading this book, and it had me like falling off the sofa. And so why did you decide to approach the topic of, friendship and motherhood with humor? And I think it's really interesting that the same reader can want both books at different times, right? Like if I was dealing with grief and I was thinking about the grief of losing a friend, I could go one way and read Donna's book, or I could go the other way and read Annie Cathryn's book. And it just depends the mental state you're in at that second in time. So why go down the humor path? Tell us about the inspiration for the friendship breakup.
Well, I had been through a ghosting situation. Someone just ghosted me out of the blue. I was blindsided. And I had no idea this was happening in my 40s. I thought I was past all of this. So I started writing about it, and I thought, if I've been through it, maybe some other people have been through it too. And it's fictional, but so as I was writing it and I was grieving the friendship, I needed laughter in my life. I needed to be able to look at it through a different lens. And although there are some serious parts of the book, there is some humor, and I think a lot of us turn to humor in order to get through something hard. And that's what I wanted my book to be for others who had been through a ghosting experience. And I didn't know how it would be received, but I've gotten so many messages from readers saying, wow, I resonated with this. It was like you were in my head. It was like you were observing my life. And I was blown away by that. I thought I was just kind of making a fictional story around what I had been through. So that was very heartwarming for me to hear.
I can totally understand that. And there are some scenes in this book that just had me laughing so hard, including the one where a stripper accidentally turns up to a parent meeting. Don't get me going. It was very, very funny scene. Annie, let's start with you on the writing advice. So what have you learned along this journey of creating, publishing your debut novel that you could share with other writers?
Okay, so I had wrote my book in a vacuum. I hadn't really reached out to other authors, but since then I've talked to many authors, and there's one thing that surprised me that I thought I just went through. There's this part in your writing process where you think it stinks. You think that what you're writing is terrible. Now, it might not happen to everyone, but it happens to quite a bit of us. So I was like, okay, how do you get through my rating is crap? So this is my advice. I call it the fresh eyes test, or the fresh perspective test. Step away from what you're writing. Do something that gives you joy. So take a walk, play with your dog, take a bath, read a good book, and then come back with fresh eyes and read what you wrote. Number one, you could say, wow, this isn't half bad. I don't know what I was thinking before, and it's fine. Number two, you could say it still stinks, but I now have a way to fix it. Or number three, yeah, no, it's terrible. But at that point, do not give up, because you are not a bad writer. It's just something that right now that you're not feeling in this scene or this part of the manuscript, but don't give up. Just keep going, because I think some people say, I'm not a writer. It's terrible. But no, you are a writer, and believe it.
I I love that. And we all, well, I think most writers go through it at some point. I certainly do. I'm working on my second book right now. And I'm sorry to tell you, debuts, that sensation of, oh my goodness, is this absolute dog turd doesn't go away just because you had one successful book. So yes, I think perspective really helps. And sometimes we listen to all those terrible rules about, sit in your chair every day and stare at your screen, when the real thing we should do is go for a walk in the forest and not sit in our chair and stare at the screen. And so, yeah.
Yes.
Let's go to D. Liebhart. You took on a book here, which is a big, meaty topic, and it's getting, great input from readers. What do you have to advise people about that kind of challenge and what you've learned?
Well, I actually, my advice is stolen. I stole it from Jane Friedman. Jane Friedman did a blog post or a newsletter post a little while ago that had a line in it that said, and I'm going to read it because it's on my wall: will you shut down and stop, or will you grapple with the challenge and grow? Mm-hmm. And so many times as you're going along this process, you come across something where there's just this big challenge, and it's going to be different for everybody, and you're going to have tons of them. And the question always at that moment is, are you going to stop? Is this it? Are you going to give up? Are you going to figure out how to grow and move beyond that? And I think for me, I mean, it was at the very beginning when I wrote the first novel that I, threw away, that rightfully should have been thrown away, to look at that and go, wait, I don't think I actually know how to write a book. Now what do I do? And then going through that process, like when you're querying agents, oh, wait, I don't know how to do this. I've got to learn this process. So I think really being willing to recognize that there's going to be challenges every step of the way. And are you going to truly learn and grow and change? Because it's one thing to be like, oh, this is a terrible process, I don't want to do this. Like, that's how I feel about querying. But it's like, no, I have to learn. If this is what I'm going to do, I have to learn how to do this, and I have to change. I have to grow. So I think really being willing to face the challenges that present themselves, and be willing to grow and get through them.
That's phenomenal advice. And I'll put the link to Jane Friedman's newsletter and website in the show notes on bestofwomensfiction.com. I recommend it for anyone who's an up-and-coming writer or into their career as a writer. Her advice and her resources are just fabulous.
I took a picture of my wall and sent it to her. I was like, I just wanted you to know this. At that moment, it was the perfect thing for me.
Donna, let's hear from you. You made this interesting decision to go nonlinear. You also tackled a tricky topic here. Tell us, what did you learn along the way?
Well, I think in terms of the nonlinear timeline, I really wanted to kind of reach into the part of us that experiences something and doesn't really even realize the lesson of it until later. And so I think that's how I developed the nonlinear timeline. In terms of my writing advice, mine is always to find your community, because writing is such a solitary act. And when I first started writing, I really wrote for myself and, had this dream of one day I'm going to publish. But when I actually decided that I wanted to publish, I really didn't have anybody to reach out to bounce ideas off of, to look at my work. So my first exposure to critique partners, I didn't even know what that was on Twitter. And there was a critique partner match. And then my second one was through an organization, the WFWA, which has been such a good support for me. And I've really created a community of people that I learned so many things from. So find your community.
That was the same for me. WFWA, Women's Fiction Writers Association, has been there at every step in terms of other authors stepping up and offering advice and supporting me. And I'll put the link. If anyone is a up and coming author and they're not aware of WFWA and you're writing women's fiction, this is your call to go check it out, because that is the most supportive community that will be for you, there for you as you grow as a writer, and that will help you work out what to do at each step. Yeah. So it has been just a joy to chat with each of you here. Last question, remind us of the title of your book and when is it available? And Donna, I'll start with you. What about for you?
Okay. All right, so my book is on pre-order right now. My Kindle is on, the Kindle version is on pre-order. My book launches June 6th, and it will be available on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Google Play, Apple, and Kobo.
Awesome. And Dee Liebhart, what about you?
So the book came out March 31st, so it's available in all the same locations that Donna was talking about. And I also have a project, a separate project that I'd love to talk about, which is rememberforme.com. So it's me.com. And it's actually a location. It's just a collaborative art project where someone can go and post a memory in honor of somebody who had dementia or has dementia. And the idea behind the project is really about recognizing that someone might lose those memories, but you hold them still. And so it's a place where people can go and honor somebody. So that's one of my other projects.
I actually checked it out last week. It's a really beautiful site and poignant, just a beautiful, beautiful experience that you put together there.
Thank you.
And Annie, I know your book's out in the world. Where can we find you?
You can find The Friendship Breakup anywhere books are sold. And I hang out on Instagram all day long, so you can find me there.
Annie has a great Bookstagram account. In fact, I knew Annie as a Bookstagrammer before I knew you as an author. You were sharing phenomenal books and book recommendations on Bookstagram. Well, thank you so much to all of you. I really appreciate you making time to do this. And I love introducing our listeners to new books, especially new books from new authors. And I'm just going to say a note of thanks to all 6 authors who joined us today. All the information is on bestofwomensfiction.com. We have an episode page with all the social media for all the authors, the links to the books, the links to every other resource that we talked about today. So thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you so much.